What's up, bows and bow ties? Yes, the title of this is called Look, I Am Not Teaching You. At least that's what I think it's going to be titled. So let me just show you what the thumbnail is that you would have selected to get into this video. For those of you out here in podcast land, I just have a picture of me saying, well, there's a little thought bubble that says, not my job. So I want people to take a look at that for a second. All right. Excuse me. So, all right. So look, I feel like in this conversation, I'm going to be a little bit of a hypocrite, but it's a nuanced conversation. So, those of you who know me, I believe that I can have all kinds of friendships. Some are going to be closer than others. I know there's a lot of people who've been hurting out here in these streets who look like me, and there's a lot of mistrust, for people who don't look like me. And I choose to show up in this world differently. I'm open to all kinds of relationships. I think everyone can learn from each other. I would say the difference is I go in with my eyes open, right? The older I have gotten, the more candid I have become. So, a while ago, I was presented with a question regarding why so many Black people are um, angry with white people, and why. I guess there's another question within that question. Such it was really it's hard to communicate actually for some reason. It was, hey, I'm trying to make things better. And so and they're like, well, why won't they work with me? Like, or something along those lines. Now I'm paraphrasing a little bit. So I want you to hang tight with me because these are nuanced conversations. Um, One of the things I would say is if you're a person who doesn't look like me and you ask me something like that, I don't have a problem with having that conversation. Just understand when you open Pandora's box, you're going to get what you're going to get. So when the question was posed, like, I feel like Black people are really angry with white people. And when people make those statements, a lot of times it's true. I don't argue it, I don't say anything, I just let people talk. And now I will say this. I have some of these conversations because I I guess interact with people in multiple groups. So when someone says, "Well, why won't, white people like loosen up and like I'm trying to make things right. I'm trying to build these relationships and all these other things." And I was like, "The audacity of you." And so I know there's one person, it's weird because the intent was not to be offensive, but nevertheless it's offensive, right? And let me explain. Now I want people to listen. Calm down. I was like, the audacity. And so she looked at me like, what do you mean? Now I've had this conversation before in another video. And I said, look, for years and in present day, um, Black people have been vilified, made out to be all kinds of horrible things. There are systems that were put in place, right? Now look, you know me, I don't believe in us being like victims because there's certain things that we can do to help ourselves, but that's another topic for another day. However, I'm like, when you are and I'm not saying you personally, but when a group of people who look like you have done these things and continue to do these things to people are just like done. I'm like, they're not required because you're now ready to want to have a kumbaya moment for them to kumbaya with you. There are some who will, and there are going to be some who are like, F you. And I was like, I find it interesting that you say that because I'm like, you actually are around people who look like me. So, the conversation kind of went down this bunny trail about just, like, well, how can I make it better? How can I make it better? It's like I'm not being given a chance. And it was very I centering. I can't do this and I can't do that. And why won't, you know, Black people just, I don't want to say get over it, but it was like a whole bunch of that. And I was like, let me ask you a question. Are you comfortable around Black people? And this person was like, yes. It's like, okay. I'm like, and where do you see these Black people? And, she was like, I see them at work. I see them out and about, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, how often are you inviting Black people into your spaces? She's like, well, you come over. I'm like, I'm one. I said, but let me ask you another question. How often are you visiting Black people in Black spaces? It got really quiet. I just allowed the pregnant pause to happen. And I was like, this is the deal. And I'll tell you where my hypocrisy comes in, by the way. I said, you can't possibly expect for Black people to truly feel comfortable around white people and trust you until you are engaging with them in their spaces. You're not spending money in their communities. You're taking from the communities, right? You're not visiting their churches unless it's election time. You're not eating in their restaurants. You're not attending their events unless it's like some sort of weirdo like music event, like with some bad rap music or something, right? I'm like, how often are you visiting Black people in Black spaces? I said, because see, your relationships with Black people are in your safe spaces, white spaces. I'm like, when you wake up every day, you leave your home in your white neighborhood and you go to jobs where they are predominantly represented by you, and you go in stores where they're going to cater to you. You work, or if you're ill, you're going to be in an environment where they're going to value your pain, right? Because a lot of times they don't value Black pain. So you feel comfortable around the medical cadre, right? So I'm like, everything about your life is a safe space. Well, and I say that tongue in cheek because it's not really everything, right? But I'm like, most of your experiences, you have a safe space. I'm like, but when Black people wake up, many times the medical community isn't serving them. They don't have banks that'll cater to them. They don't have grocery stores that'll serve their foods. Where they go to work does not look like them. Schools or higher education institutions, unless you can get to an HBCU. Employment opportunities, generally speaking. So, how often are you going in their spaces? And it got really quiet. Now, I'm going to tell you about my hypocrisy. With that being said, I oftentimes don't invite a bunch of people who don't look like me into my space because that is my safe space. When you don't look like me and you wake up and you have to go out into the world and you experience microaggression after microaggression after microaggression, right? And people, they don't even realize it. Right. And I'm not, and look, and it's human nature. Like all of us have issues. I've said things that are probably, I'm sure I've said something that was problematic. Right. Oftentimes it's just because if you don't have access to the community, for example, I don't live in the LGBTQ community as far as like, I don't really frequent those places. I don't hang out with people who are part of the community, at least not knowingly. Right. So what happens is I'm not going to know a whole lot about the culture. People tend to go where there's more like them. So when white people say these things to me. I'm like, look, it doesn't make you a bad person because you hang around people who like you, right? There's nothing wrong with that. Just understand for Black people, because we are a minority, and we don't have as many spaces. We tend to, generally speaking, protect our spaces. I know I do. I protect my safe space. So she made the comment like, well, I'm trying to learn. Well, why can't you guys just teach me? Right. And I know she didn't mean it as like you guys, like I get it. So I'm not going to nitpick everything. And this next graphic that I'm going to put up, do you see who that is? That's John. I can't get the words out. Dr. John Henry Clark. And the quote on this says, I only debate with my equals. All others I teach. I would like to caveat by saying that I don't always feel like I need to teach. I selectively teach if I think that people are putting in the work or doing the work. Now, let me just say this. There are a lot of people that I'm cool with and I'm friends with, and they don't necessarily frequent Black spaces. Does it mean I think that they're racist people? No. I think, is it possibly limiting? It could be, right? Only thing I can do is be my fully functioning formed self. Um, I don't hide who I am. I think those who know me, I'm like, I don't do that. That's not culturally what I would do, right? Like I can be a little shady sometimes. And they're like, oh Lord, like, but it is what it is. I inject a little bit of humor into it too, because I'm like, I don't know what that is, but I'm not about that life. Like, no, like all the way no. But I say this, I'm going to say that, let me tell you the reason why I don't necessarily go all the way out of my way to teach. People who look like me, we know a lot about other people. We're forced to. That's including the Asians. We don't know everything because they safeguard their community, right? They gatekeep in their community too. But we observe. We know that people outside of us view us a certain kind of way. We know this. We're not under any illusions. And so we're like, okay, we recognize it for what it is. And they think we don't know, but we know. The interesting thing about it is when people are saying like, well, how are they going to learn unless you teach them? I'm like, let me tell you something. People who don't look like me have access to the same resources and more. They have access to Google and books. And check this out. If they choose to immerse themselves in an environment that is unfamiliar, maybe one that's got a lot of Black people in, I don't know, right? You will learn. It's called through heuristics. You will learn through heuristics. So to me, I'm like, you can do the work. You don't have to be lazy. Everybody says Black people are lazy. I'm like, well, I find everybody else to be lazy. You do the work. I'm like, look, I'm not on like the physical plantation. We're not on that plantation. We're on a different type of plantation, but I'm not on the plantation. I'm like, I am not required to teach you. And I think people, when they are expecting us to teach them, I'm like, that's great that you have the privilege of thinking that I'm required to teach you. I'm like, what you can do is you can put in some work. Because, see, we've had to study. We've had to study how to do things. And I don't think we're always getting a passing grade, But I will say, I'm like, you can do the same. So when people say I have Black friends, I know we like to demonize people when they say that because it's so funny, but I'm like, yeah, but they're coming in white spaces. You're not going in Black spaces. And if this doesn't apply, then it doesn't apply. So please don't get in your feelings. I'm not going to be here to like help you work out your feelings. I think the reason why I'm like at the point where I don't want to deal with a lot of teaching is because I'm like, I should not be required to do the emotional labor for you. You need to do that labor. You need to go figure it out. I don't have a problem with people asking questions, but generally speaking, it's not my job to teach. So when people are like, well, why can't you do this and why can't you do that? And yes, I've had these conversations with people, like legitimately so. I'm like, You have every opportunity to teach yourself. Also, I feel like there are people out here who don't look like me. I think they know better. They choose to do differently. So that's the reason why when I know it's like when I talk about my hypocrisy, right? I'm like, I don't typically invite a whole lot of people into my space. I have very few spaces where I can feel comfortable, safe, warm. Have there been other people in my home? Yes. But it takes me time to get there. I don't typically offer up my home for different things and events and stuff like that. That's just where I'm at with it today. And maybe it'll change in the future. But anyway, I just want to throw that right back up there. It is not my job. It is not my job to teach you. It's not. I need you to go ahead and do some of the work on yourself. You can, some of it is literally learning through heuristics. Again, Dr. John Henry Clark, he said, I only debate with my equals. All others I teach. For those of you who want to put in that work, I say that's great. Right now, I'm just not there. I don't feel like putting in the work. I've had to put in work every day. Every day. I probably should have taken my name off of my screen here. All right. So look, I just wanted to have that little conversation and make sure that people understood why I'm kind of a hypocrite because I don't like to invite people into my spaces. Nevertheless, there are people who are willing to invite you in. If you can't get into their personal spaces, one of the things you can do is go into Black communities. Or better yet, for those of you who are Christian, right? If you are a Protestant more particular in particular, right? Have you attempted to go to a Black church? Now, for those of you who know, you know, right? Like we understand there is a whole big thing as far as what they talk about racism in clergy. So, or I guess I call it clergy, but oftentimes people who are pastoring churches that don't look like me, I think oftentimes look down at churches who are pastoring people who look like me. Even though these pastors are highly educated, they've gone to these great schools, they're well read, well studied, all these things. But like I said, how often have they gone to a Black church? And we all know on Sunday that is the most segregated hour. Isn't that what they say? The most segregated hour or time is on Sundays when we all separate. The Asians go to their church, the whites go to their church, the Blacks go to their church. So we're all a little bit messed up, right? Where I'm going with it is I know I'm a hypocrite as far as I don't let a whole lot of people into my personal space. But nevertheless, I believe that people can learn by going into other spaces. I should not have to teach you all the time. I still get questions on people are surprised. Like, so my daughter, where I just started letting her wear a little bit of braids, so it makes it so much easier, right? They think that her hair is like this long. Now, I used to with her natural hair braid it up and then wrap it up into cute little balls or puffs or whatever. And they'd be like, once in a blue moon, if I would straighten her hair, they'd be like, "Oh my goodness, her hair grew so much." I'm like, "No, it was always like that." But I've had to explain to people, I'm like, you do, first of all, do not go up and touch a Black person, especially my child, because we're not your pets. Number one. So it's a violation of my space. And if you're curious, I get it, but would you go up to a white person and touch her hair? Stop it. Number two, I'm like, if you've been around Black people enough, you do know that our hair has a lot of shrinkage, right? So when we choose to, extend the length by whatever, I'm like, obviously it looks different, but people want to touch it. I'm like, don't touch. So anyway, I get it. Like if you don't know, you don't know. I mean, in instances like that, I could see if you said like, I don't, how does this work, right? But the touching and all that, I'm like, don't touch. I am up in where I am right now. I remember I was volunteering at a food pantry. It was once a month, and I would go in there and volunteer. And I remember what was so weird about that situation was I was holding some cheap coffee from I think it was like Burger King or something because I didn't have time to make some, which was stupid. And I was so hungry. So I ran out and grabbed a sandwich and got some coffee. I mean, the whole thing was stupid. Anyway, I'm standing there with a cup of coffee, and this woman comes up to me and she starts stroking. I had longer braids then. They were long. I mean, they were like fabulous kind of long, not like butt long, but she starts stroking my hair. So I'm like, whoa. I mean, it was practically like I pulled like a matrix move. I mean, I was practically like, floating around. So I was like, what are you doing? She was like, oh, your hair is so beautiful. And I'm like, looking at her like, why are you touching me? She's like, so you're like that African American family that moved in around the corner? And so are you like the Mormons? Now, this is the reason why I say people need to be around more Black people. Number one, don't touch me. Number two, why would you assume I was Mormon? Of all religions, Mormon? I'm like, the Mormons don't typically do caffeine. So I had this huge thing of coffee. And number three, up until recently, and they probably still do, I don't know. Let me say allegedly. The Mormons were teaching that Black people were the color we were because we were cursed. There was so much racism in the church. Black people weren't even allowed to be Mormons. And so she assumed I was like, this is how I know you need to get out. You need to get out. So I'm looking at her for the ding dong that she was and probably still is. Because I'm like, there's so many things that's wrong with this conversation right now. Don't touch me. I'm a full-on Black woman, so I don't know how you could possibly think I'm Mormon. And I have a huge cup of coffee. That's a talkable moment. I was going to redo the video on talk, and my buddy CBR kid is like, I don't know if you need to do that one. I think I'm going to do it. What is a talk? That's a talk, and there are ways and moments when to use that. So anyway, that's pretty much it for me. I am not your teacher. All right, I'm not your teacher. Go read some books. Go to some other places. Learn through heuristics and learn through data.